They lined up for supper, bowls in hand. The smell of stew drifted through the orphanage halls. But with every bite, the children whispered the same fear, that the meal in their bowls was not made from animals at all, but from the missing faces of their friends. In Georgia, in 1903, an orphanage would earn its place as one of the darkest legends in Southern history. And at its center stood a woman named Sister Agnes. Sister Agnes was the head caretaker of a rural Georgia orphanage at the turn of the century. To the townsfolk, she was a figure of stern piety, a woman of black robes, rosary beads clicking at her side, lips pressed tightly as if to hold in judgment. She was entrusted with the most vulnerable children, the abandoned, the unwanted, the poor left behind by plague, poverty, or cruelty. But to the children inside those walls, Sister Agnes was not a savior. She was a warden. The orphanage was not a place of comfort, but of discipline and hunger. The year was 1903. Rural Georgia was still scarred by the aftermath of Reconstruction, poverty eating away at families, and orphans filled many of the state's institutions. These orphanages operated behind closed doors, underfunded and unsupervised. Towns were content to hand their children to the church and look away. Behind the high brick walls and locked gates, Sister Agnes ruled with severity. Children were woken before dawn, forced to pray until their knees ached on cold stone. Meals were meager, watery porridge, stale bread, thin broth. Punishments were swift and cruel. A missed chore meant the lash of a cane. Talking out of turn meant days without food. And then the children began to disappear. At first, no one noticed. Orphans were transient. Sometimes families reclaimed them. Sometimes they ran away. Sometimes illness swept them quietly into the grave. But within the walls of Sister Agnes's orphanage, whispers began. A boy who had shared your bed one night was gone by morning. A girl who had sung beside you in chapel never came back from her chores. The caretakers gave no explanation. Sister Agnes said only, "They were called elsewhere." But the empty beds multiplied, and with them came a more terrifying suspicion. The meals began to change. The broth thickened. The meat tasted strange, unfamiliar. Some children claimed it was richer, heavier, with a metallic tang they could not name. Sister Agnes urged them to eat, standing at the head of the dining hall as spoons scraped against tin bowls. At night, in whispers beneath the thin blankets, the children began to say the unthinkable, that the stew was not beef, nor pork, nor chicken, that the missing children had not run away at all, that Sister Agnes was feeding them their own. Daily life in the orphanage became a cycle of fear. The bell rang before dawn. The children filed into the chapel, their breath misting in the cold, their stomachs empty. After prayers came chores, scrubbing, hauling, mending, and always hunger gnawed. The punishments grew harsher. Sister Agnes, with her gaunt face and unyielding eyes, carried a wooden rod she called the shepherd's staff. It cracked against backs and palms without hesitation. The smaller children trembled at her footsteps in the hallway, the sound of her keys jangling like chains. But worse than the punishments were the disappearances. A boy punished one night would be gone the next day. A girl locked in the cellar was never seen again. Each vanished child deepened the dread that clung to the halls like mold. The dining hall became the stage for that dread. Wooden tables stretched beneath flickering oil lamps. The children sat in silence, heads bowed, waiting as steaming pots were ladled into their bowls. Sister Agnes stood watch, her shadow stretching long across the wall. The stew filled their mouths with warmth, but also with terror. Some gagged at the taste, others forced themselves to swallow. The older children whispered, trading theories. The younger ones cried silently into their food. Each bite carried the same question: who am I eating tonight? By 1903, the whispers began to leak beyond the orphanage walls. Townsfolk noticed that fewer children were seen in the yard. Parents who came to visit were told their children had been sent elsewhere. A local butcher remarked that Sister Agnes had not bought meat in months, though the orphanage continued to serve it. One evening, 2 older boys attempted escape. They slipped through a broken shutter, running barefoot into the woods, branches tearing at their skin. They reached town by dawn, ragged, terrified, and the story they told chilled the community to its core. They spoke of nights when children were taken to the cellar and never returned. They described the strange taste of their meals, the thick, dark stews served after disappearances. They swore that Sister Agnes herself oversaw the butchering. At first, the townsfolk dismissed it as childish fear, but the details, so vivid, so consistent, could not be ignored. And when the sheriff finally arrived at the orphanage, lantern in hand, the truth began to surface. The climax came when the cellar was opened. It was a stone chamber beneath the orphanage, cold and damp, the air heavy with decay. Lantern light flickered across hooks on the walls, across barrels that stank of brine, across stains that no prayer could wash away. In one corner, shallow graves were uncovered. Small bones, hastily buried, protruded from the dirt. In another, sacks of clothing, tiny shoes, dresses, trousers, hidden away like evidence of ghosts. The dining pots, still warm from the night's meal, contained meat that was not easily identified. But in the weeks that followed, physicians and investigators confirmed what the children had whispered. The meals were human. The horror was unmasked. Sister Agnes did not flee. She stood calmly as authorities dragged her from the orphanage, her eyes sharp, her mouth muttering prayers. Some said she believed she had done nothing wrong, that she had simply ensured no flesh went to waste. Others said she was mad, driven by hunger or delusion. But for the children who had survived her reign, the truth was undeniable. They had eaten their own. The aftermath was chaos. News of the discovery spread across Georgia, then beyond. Headlines screamed of the cannibal orphanage, of the nun who fed children their missing peers. Crowds gathered outside the orphanage, throwing stones, demanding vengeance. The orphanage was shuttered within days. The children were dispersed to other institutions, though the trauma followed them for life. Some never spoke of it again. Others, decades later, told their children and grandchildren of the nightmare they had endured. As for Sister Agnes, records diverge. Some say she was tried, convicted, and executed. Others claim she died in prison, muttering prayers to the very end. A few whisper that she escaped, vanishing into the anonymity of another convent far from Georgia. But the legend lived on. The site of the orphanage fell into ruin, its walls crumbling, its cellar left untouched. Locals said the land was cursed, that no grass would grow where the graves had been uncovered. Children dared each other to approach, swearing they heard cries in the night, smelled the faint aroma of stew drifting from the empty windows. Historians who search for the truth today find only fragments: yellowed newspapers, oral testimonies, court records half missing. Some argue the story was exaggerated, a mix of neglect, starvation, and hysteria twisted into folklore. Others insist the horror was real, buried by officials desperate to erase Georgia's shame. This was Sister Agnes's story, the caretaker who became a predator, the nun whose orphanage turned into a place of terror, the woman whose meals carried the darkest secret of all. Her story forces us to ask, how many other institutions, hidden behind walls of faith and charity, concealed horrors that history refused to record? And what does it say about society, that the most vulnerable children were left in her hands, their cries unheard until it was too late? The ruins of the orphanage may be gone, but the whispers remain. In Georgia, some still speak of the orphanage of silent meals, a legend passed in hushed voices, a reminder that sometimes the kindest faces hide the cruelest hungers. This was Sister Agnes's story, but many remain untold. If you want more hidden dark history stories, watch this playlist here. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the stories history tried to erase.